Chapter 8, Reading and Literature Instruction for English Learners by Heather Edwards, Melanie Oliver, and Megan Nelson. What does research tell us about reading in a second language? It shows us that the process is essentially the same. Both first and second language readers look at the page and the print and use their knowledge of sound-symbol relationships, word order, grammar, and meaning to make predictions. Second language proficiency and background knowledge have a huge impact on second language readers. Limitations in a language proficiency will generally make it more difficult to predict words, sounds, and meaning. When we read, instead of actually reading each word, we predict words such as a, the, in, and on. Doing this for English language learners can be difficult. Background knowledge plays an important role in the reading process. For example, fairy tales follow a particular narrative structure, beginning with the typical meaning, once upon a time. Our knowledge and experience with fairy tales helps us with comprehension and to predict where the story is leading. English language learners that are proficient readers in their first language have a substantial head start. Learning to read involves gradually developing the ability to recognize words quickly. Then the focus is on concentrating on meaning rather than the words themselves. Good readers attend to every word and letter on a page without even realizing it. Like we talked about before, background knowledge also plays an important role in being a proficient reader. Take a look at this cartoon to examine the role of background knowledge, inferences, and metacognition in the comprehension process. Take a minute to read and look over the comprehension question. You were probably able to answer most of the questions pretty easily by looking at the cartoon. From what we know about cartoons, we gather that it is supposed to be humorous. We see that the figures are insects, and we can infer that they are at a showing for a horror movie. How did we infer that? We used our use of background knowledge to make inferences based on the picture and the word cues in the cartoon. The elements of reading comprehension and metacognition are background knowledge and inferences, decoding and vocabulary, metacognition, or thinking about thinking, and text structure. Background knowledge about the genre and subject plays a major role in the comprehension process. Our prior experience lets us know what we have to interpret in the text. Decoding vocabulary. Part of the reading process that aids in comprehension is decoding vocabulary and vocabulary knowledge. When students are reading, they might come across an unfamiliar word. Students might decode this word by breaking it into parts and sounding it out. They also need to have understanding of word meaning. In addition, students also need to make inferences when they are reading. They take the literal information in the text and combine it with their background knowledge to draw conclusions about meaning. Metacognition is the process of analyzing out our comprehension process, or thinking about what we're thinking. Some strategies for this are going back into the text to take a closer look when something doesn't make sense or isn't clear, or questioning yourself while reading. Text structure helps students make predictions about what will come next or what to expect. For example, if they are reading a passage about two different schools, they would predict that the author will be presenting similarities and differences in the passage. Working in literature response groups. When students work in literature response groups, they are discussing the work of published authors. These groups usually consist of 3 to 6 students who have read a piece of literature and are ready to discuss it. Before having your students work in this type of environment, it is helpful to model response to literature for your students. In order to prepare your students to work in these groups, strong literature practices must be in place. Some steps to prepare your students would be reading good literature to students daily and drawing informal individual responses, sharing your own responses on the literature, connecting characters and situations to the students' own lives, emphasis on personal response to literature, and teaching vocabulary to talk about literature. How does this assist our English language learners? These response groups offer English language learners the opportunity to enjoy literature and give students the opportunity to help each other contemplate the meaning of stories. Over time, and with the right strategies, English language learners will become familiar with the ways of talking about literature. When starting these groups, it often places all of the students on an equal playing field when it comes to talking about literature. Allowing time for independent reading promotes a high level of language and literacy development. Independent reading also builds vocabulary, background knowledge, and interest in reading. It also boosts reading comprehension and overall English language development. One of the most important things we can do for our students is create a comfortable, safe environment for independent reading. There are 3 types of independent reading: uninterrupted sustained silent reading, or USSR, extensive reading, and narrow reading. Uninterrupted sustained silent reading encourages students to read a large variety of self-selected books to read on their own. With the USSR, students aren't required to do any follow-up activities on their reading. Extensive reading is essentially the same, but includes post-reading activities such as role-playing, making a poster, or sharing views on the text with fellow students. Narrow reading has students read a large number of texts on the same topic. This gives the students the chance to read materials that build vocabulary and background knowledge, making future reading easier. During independent reading, it is important to watch your students' reading levels. A thorough way to assess your students' reading levels is using the Informal Reading Inventories, or IRIs. These assessments indicate whether a student can read a particular passage independently with assistance or not at all. To judge whether your students are able to read the selected material, they should have a 98% word recognition and 95% comprehension. A strategy students can use to select appropriate independent reading material is called the 5-finger exercise. Have your students count how many unfamiliar words they come across on the first page. If they reach 5, it's probably too difficult. Graded books are designed for older students who have a lower reading level. These books and articles are comprised of topics appropriate for higher grade students with lower reading levels. Electronic books are great resources for English language learners because of the variety it provides. In addition to the wide variety, there is the idea of convenience and mobility that helps students move ahead in their reading. All about beginning readers. Beginning level second language readers are just beginning to pull meaning from reading short text. These readers may be unfamiliar with the English alphabet and its unusual spelling patterns. They have a small repertoire of sight words and can read simple texts but have difficulty processing information beyond sentence-level text. They need more experience with written language. These readers need practice in sound symbol correspondences in English and reminders that English reads from right to left and top to bottom. They also need practice in reading simple text independently. Here are some strategies to help move beginning readers toward proficiency. The language experience approach. Through this approach, language experience reading is tailored to the learner's own interests, background knowledge, and language proficiency. This approach is an excellent tool to use with older students with low reading levels that need age-appropriate material. The stories are dictated by individual students, small groups, or the whole class, and are generally written down verbatim. The students then read the story aloud and are often able to do so with little decoding because they have already been familiarized with the text. When students read their own stories, they are able to experience the success of independent reading. Providing quality literature for beginners. For beginner readers, it is important for teachers to guide them in selecting their appropriate reading materials. Beginning readers need supporting strategies in reference to reading. Some of these strategies are pattern books, illustrating stories and poems, directed listening thinking activities, and reader's theater. Pattern books contain stories that make use of repeated phrases, refrains, and sometimes rhymes. They often contain pictures that facilitate story comprehension. Having students make a published book of a short story, folktale, or poem, and create pictures that illustrate their literature allows English language learners to integrate into collective activities. Directed listening thinking activity is a strategy where the teacher facilitates communication throughout the reading of a story. The teacher asks the questions throughout the story, guiding students to make predictions. Asking your own questions at the beginning of a story encourages your students to generate their own questions as the story continues. Reader's theater is a strategy used to promote students' response to literature. Stories used with reader's theater for beginning readers should be somewhat brief and have simple structure with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Some other strategies for beginning readers include story mapping, guided reading, and shared reading with big books. Intermediate readers. Intermediate readers have a large sight word vocabulary and the ability to comprehend various kinds of text. They read extended text, but still have some difficulty with texts that contain new vocabulary. Strategies that are most appropriate for intermediate readers are cognitive mapping, directed reading thinking activities, and literature response journals. Cognitive mapping is a graphic drawing summarizing a text. This can be used to help readers with their comprehension. The directed reading thinking activities are similar to the directed listening thinking activities discussed in the previous slide. The only difference is the students read the text to themselves silently after having made predictions during oral discussion. Literature response journals allow students to write down their thoughts, feelings, and reactions to the text they are reading. It is appropriate to give the students some general guidelines, but the main purpose of this strategy is to allow students to write freely. Developing scripts for reader's theater and adapting stories into plays and scripts for film and videotape are other strategies used for intermediate readers and adapted for their level. There are a wide variety of programs available to help English language learners. These programs provide a lot of visual aids for students. There are also programs that allow students to create and illustrate their own stories. Computers and CD-ROM programs are great ways to help your English language learners. Assessing second language readers' progress. There are many ways to assess second language readers' progress. Assessing with materials students bring to class allows students to pick a text they are comfortable with. This is a great non-threatening way to assess your students. Students can bring anything from a TV guide to a magazine. It is important to assess students' reading with various materials over a period of time. Informal assessments are administered individually and are done periodically throughout the year to establish a profile of progress. The miscues analysis focuses on the reader's miscues. This assessment helps teachers learn a lot about the mistakes students are making and why they are making them. This process analyzes a measure of overall comprehension. This process is also completed by selecting a short reading, about 500 words, that is slightly more difficult than the reader's level. Then you tape the student's oral reading, let the student listen back to the tape for fun, and then later listen to the tape again yourself to analyze miscues. To better understand how to interpret miscues you hear in your student's oral reading, turn to Figure 811 on page 318 in your book. Running records are shorthand transcriptions of students' oral reading of a text taken on the spot. Student self-assessment puts students in charge of their own assessment. Students are often able to tell the teacher more about what they are having difficulty with than we can tell from assessment of their reading. Differentiating reading and literature instruction, including students' cultures. It's important to understand your students' backgrounds and include their languages, cultures, and interests into their instruction. Informal observations will help you better understand your students' instructional needs as well. Take the strategy provided in this chapter. It's important to take all of these strategies discussed in this chapter and adapt them to the instructional needs of your students.